Hi, everyone. I'm excited about today's episode. We're going to talk about reducing developmental delays with at home strategies. I think that phrase, developmental delays, is a little bit scary for everyone because it's like, what does it mean? So, we're going to be focusing on the PT, physical therapy aspect. And so, we have Shannon here who's going to share her expertise. So, I'm going to hand it over to you, Shannon, if you can start off with telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then we'll go ahead and dive right in.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Dr. Shannon Davis. I'm a physical therapist and mom inventor of the Little Balance Box and also a certified autism specialist. So lots of knowledge that I bring to the discussion today. So hope everyone enjoys it.
I'm so excited with your background and all of your expertise. So I just want to jump in with starting off. Let's talk about the developmental delays in babies and toddlers and what that actually means when we talk about that or when we hear that word. And then we can talk a little bit about some baby gear that sounds to be pretty popular and how that may not be so supportive.
Yes. So developmental delays is often a scary word for a lot of parents when they hear that. Whether it be from friends or relatives or medical providers. And so it can be daunting, but in a lot of ways too, it can actually be really supportive. And the reason why is because sometimes when parents do start to feel like maybe their child is a little delayed in their development, knowing that there might be support on the horizon and that they don't have to bear the burden of working on everything with their child's development can actually take a lot of the load off. So I liked when I do talk to parents and families and they feel a little intimidated by that word, I try to get them to see the other side of what the word can mean and the fact that it can actually be a word of opportunity for giving them more resources to help their child. So yes, there's a lot of stigma and reaction that goes along with the word, but it also opens a lot of doors for services for individuals. And so the whole thing about where that word comes from is children develop so differently. It really depends on what their exposure is, what their motor learning patterns are. And I'll give you a great example. The studies show that it can take anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 repetitions for a child to develop a new skill. And so depending on what environment they're learning that in, that's a lot of repetitions that your child has to be involved with to do a new skill. So if you think about it simplistically like that, it might mean that just your child needs a little more time to practice to catch up with everybody else.
That's pretty crazy to think because I feel like kids learn so quick. They pick up on things so fast. So if you need to do it that many times, then either A, good that you're getting that much exposure. And if not, then B, great that you're getting the interventions if you're able to catch that early on. So can we talk a little bit about maybe some baby gear that tends to be popular that maybe isn't so good for the development of children? I think with social media and the internet, it's so easy to be overwhelmed and to not really know what the right answer is, right? You might see this new item and you're like, oh, that would be so cool. But we are just bombarded, especially as a first time parent, with
Everything,
right? And it's so easy to buy in, like, oh, yeah, I need that because this ad told me. So what are some tools or some baby gear that really is like, maybe reconsider?
So the way that I like to talk about baby gear is understanding the whys behind the baby gear. And so we hear the words thrown around about container syndrome and container baby gear and stuff like that. And those devices tend to be things that hold or support a child so they don't move around or limit their movement, which if we go back to the 3,000 to 5,000 repetitions, that's where that becomes a problem, right? Because if a child's contained, then they're not getting the opportunity to practice all of those motor skills. And we like to talk about it being what's called a whole body movement because our bodies move forward, backwards, side to side, and then they also move in a rotation basis, right? So if a child's in any type of baby gear that's hindering any of those planes of motion, they're not able to put all of these experiences together to regulate their developmental system. So when you're choosing baby gear, yes, there's times where, okay, maybe we have to have those seated items or those contained items because the reality is we need to keep our kids safe and things need to be done. Bottom line, happens to all of us. However, the reality is we need to be aware of those 5, 10 different items that we're using, the car seat, the high chair, the swing, the jumper, the seater. All of those things are containing or limiting emotion. So it's okay if we're using them, but we have to be aware what it's doing to the child's development. Is it blocking or hindering the development? And how much time of day we're using all of these items. So you really have to step back and look at that daily routine or schedule for a child and think about those opportunities for free mobility and free movement in relation to the baby gear. The other one too that a lot of people don't think about is the swaddling and how a child sleeps at night. And so there's definitely a place for the wrapping and the swaddling because it's a comforting for a child and helping them transition. But during the night is actually a very safe space for a child to be practicing a lot of their motor skills where they stretch and they move around while they're sleeping. And so this is where it really comes down to education about the baby gear and the baby items. And that's what I actually spend a lot of time doing for families. And I feel is a big negligence in the market that more individuals that manufacture baby gear aren't providing that information as to here's our product. Here's how to understand how to use this the right way in your baby's development in that 24-hour period in relation to all the things that your child is using. Because again, if we go back to those elements of needing all these repetitions to practice motor skills, when are we getting those practice times if we're using all this different baby gear? So that's a big concept that we really try to educate on. So it makes it, I feel, a lot more empowering for the parents to understand and have that role that it's not just society dictating what baby gear and baby items they need. They can make educated decisions based on that and maybe what the child's routine is, what the family's routine is of what items are going to work best for them.
And that we don't need every item that's out in the market too.
No, you don't. I will even say I love my balance box and I created it. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But people reach out to me and they'll say, you know, a child doesn't need something to learn how to walk. And I said, you're absolutely right. A child doesn't need a lot of things out there for them to do what they need to do. But it's understanding that education. So if and when you do need to purchase baby gear or something to help your child with their development, you're making an educated decision based on what's out there and what your child needs during that time of development.
So let's dive into the little balance box. We have one and it has been really nice for my daughter who's has had difficulty with just learning to stand or wanting to stand. So we're not at the point of walking yet. But can you tell us about the little balance box, what it is, and how it's different in design?
Yes. So military wife, I had two girls. And so as I was sitting there cooking one night, little sister was trying to chase big sister and she was going through that transition of standing to walking. And she would always fall when she went from carpeted to our tile floors. And she had the push walker. And so I was always stopping, picking her up and just repeating it. And I was like, there's got to be something else out there that actually is designed to help a child with their gross motor skills in learning to balance and walk versus just something that is being more entertainment in nature. And so that's when I set out to kind of design the balance box. And this is why it looks so different than a traditional push toy, for example, that's out there. So the first thing is the bottom here, which is the feet. So we have no wheels. They are springs in the feet. So there's springs. And so what the springs first off allowed to do is transition on the different floor surfaces without it moving too fast. We also have these little silicone booties to kind of customize your child's experience depending on the floor surfaces. So those are real easy to remove. But not only do the springs help with the floor surfaces, but they provide something very important to the developmental system. This sensation is called proprioception. And so everybody can, when they're done this, watching us, go Google this and learn about how important proprioception is in the joints in your child's development. And so when a child's using the balance box and they're leaning on that top surface and this is pushing down, it's giving that enhanced sensory feedback. And so that's where we talk about understanding the different products and what the resources are and what it's bringing to your child's development. So that's one feature that is very unique in the balance box is that there's no wheels. So it's much easier to control and we have the springs in the feet. This version that we now have is also adjustable. So that's what's going on here. It's very easy to adjust, just a pin mechanism. I don't have another walker next to me, but if I did have one, and we often get questions about this, is the little balance box is much shorter than a traditional push toy, probably about 5 to 6 inches shorter. Why? Because there's no other products out there that allow a child to actually transition from tall kneeling to standing. That's a very important skill for a child to work on because it works on their core and it works on their pelvic floor muscles. And so by having something that's shorter, it allows that access point for a child. And then with the flat surface, so this is a big one that really confuses people because they're like, why is it flat? Doesn't it make more sense to have a push bar? Actually, no. At this age and stage of development, there's something called the palmar reflex grasp. I don't know if everybody out there in the audience remembers this one, but this is the one where you put something in a baby's hand and what do? They grab it and they don't let go. So when that reflex is not fully integrated yet, meaning that still happens, if you give the child a push bar and they start to roll forward, guess what? They don't let go because their brain isn't developed enough to understand, I need to release that because it's pulling away from me and causing me to be unsteady. So that's one of the things in the balance box when I was developing this. I looked at what does the child need in their development versus what's already out there and putting a different color of paint on it or a different noise and making the same thing. So with this flat surface here, a child can put their hands or forearms wherever they feel most comfortable and supported. So it's based on their terms of what's going to work from them. So then they can use their forearms, they can use their hands, and then they come more upright as they're using the balance box as they get stronger, more coordinated. So you can use the balance box actually as early as starting as 6 months of age for a child with good head and trunk control, not because the 6-month-old is standing and walking, but what is the 6-7-month-old starting to do? Sit in a high chair and eat solid. So they have to have good core muscle strength to be able to do that. And so by having your child maybe sitting in your lap crisscross and having them kind of come up to standing or even standing and pushing on those springs and playing with a toy or reaching, that's all working on that core development. And so these are the kinds of things that we try to educate families and parents on about understanding when you're purchasing baby gear, what is it doing to help with your child's development? Is it an entertainment item? Great. Then it's an entertainment item and that's how it's classified. But what is being used to help on those developmental skills? And then lastly, it can be used as a toddler table. Because we all know that everything out there, we don't like a lot of clutter. We want something to be able to be kept for years with baby gear, makes life a lot easier. And so the next stage of development is if a child's using this as a tabletop surface, and we know that children have a hard time sitting in a chair and kind of scooting into a tabletop. And so this way they could just sit on the floor and pull it closer to them. So it makes a great height for that. And then really far along the Legos. This is perfect because nobody likes to tramp on the Legos. So it keeps all the Legos in place as they get older and you use it for your Lego table. So being a mom and physical therapist, when I set out to design it, I really wanted something that had the longevity for it, but then also really hit the checks in the box regarding the development.
I love that. And we've also used it for our needs. We had to get rid of our coffee table. So when baby's still asleep, we get to use it for, maybe our coffee, or I had to put my pump down on there while I'm pumping after bedtime. So yes, multi-purpose.
Yes. And there's actually some of my favorite photos and videos of this after hours that parents send me of like, look at this, look at the way we're using the balance box.
Balancing it all, right? Multi-purpose.
Exactly.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the guilt that parents feel whenever they hear that word developmental delays, right? You go to the doctor and maybe your child is delayed. And obviously that's like, oh, no parent wants to ever hear that. So shifting that mindset, and you did touch on this a little bit on just getting more resources. What's the best way to show up and to be an advocate and not to worry so much when this word does come up, if it comes up?
So this is also me speaking from personal experience and stuff that I've dealt with my children is your intuition should never be questioned. That's first and foremost, is that if you think that something is off, it's always better to be proactive, especially every insurance, every state is very different in being able to get resources. And so I always tell parents, it's best to get on a waiting list, best to just take those next steps if you think that there is anything in concern or question. So you at least are starting the process. So you're at least feeling like you're doing something. Even if it takes a couple months to get into an appointment, you've at least started kind of getting into the system. So that in itself, I think, is the first thing that somebody can do. Yes, it's a lot to take in the information and processing it, and everybody processes at their own speed, and family dynamics too, as mother and father process the information differently and how they handle it. But really the best thing that you can do is just try to keep moving forward and doing what you're doing. That's the biggest thing, is because if you as a parent are starting to question yourself, or, check out or become passive, that's definitely not going to help the situation. And so we have to remember that we are the cheerleaders and the advocate, as hard as it is to deal with the information, but we have to just keep going because that's the only way that things will either get better or we're going to get information. And so it's, taking the time and the energy, what are you going to use it for, right? To sit there and think about the situation, think about the diagnosis, or try to put those energies into taking what's in front of you and doing what you can do. And most oftentimes, what that is just to keep moving forward and doing, especially in regards to gross motor things, is just keep doing what you're doing, having the child exposed to different activities, trying to get them to move around, giving them support and helping them with motor movement. Because all of those things, especially for gross motor, it goes back to what we talked about, practice, 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 practice. And so at the end of the day, even if you're doing that, and even if you don't know how to do it and you're not a therapist, which any parent out there who knows, if you've ever had a child that's had to go through therapy, you actually become an honorary therapist because you're responsible for doing all the home programming, is that just keep moving and just keep trying to get them to do the different things with sitting, crawling, standing, holding on to things, letting go. All of those things are the foundation for gross motor movement. So as long as you keep trying to do those in any capacity that you can, you're still making progress in the right direction until you can seek that medical opinion.
Love that. I want to shift it over back to the little balance box and talk about, because your product is created by you, you're a PT, automatically people assume, well, my child doesn't have developmental delays, I don't need it. So how is your design, or the little balance box, really designed to support all kids and parents, not just individuals with delays?
Great question. That is one that I get a lot. I almost wish that I didn't tell people that I was a PT, because that's exactly what they assume. And the reality is when people ask me that, I said, well, don't all children need to learn how to work on core development and pelvic floor muscles and balance and learning how to walk? Like, that's not unique to just working with a child who has gross motor delays. All children want that ability. And so by using the balance box, and because of the way it's designed, it gives that opportunity for all children to experience it. And the other thing too is because we do have it designed to be used with a child starting at 6 to 7 months of age. In a lot of ways, you're being proactive to give them those motor skills and the repetitions and the optimum situation to possibly prevent gross motor developmental delays. And really, that's what us as therapists are trying to do more for society and for industry, is understanding that you don't have to wait as a parent to be waiting until you get into that doctor's appointment. There's so many tools and resources, and there are other products out there that are also made by some of my friends who are also therapists, speech pathologists, and OTs. And so that's the beauty of the system that we live today, is that these developmental tools, they are cost effective, they're easy to get, online. You don't have to wait to go to a doctor's appointment or a therapy appointment to get something that's covered by insurance. We can start earlier. And by starting earlier with some of these devices that all kids can use, we are hopeful that in turn, we are then reducing globally some of those delays, because we're doing really, really early intervention, because you guys are basically having access, the general public's having access to these things that are designed with a very therapeutic base in mind.
You mentioned the parents having to sometimes wait. So this is the perfect lead into this question, which I think many parents can relate to, myself included. When you have a child that you want to get in to see a specialist or a doctor, oftentimes, especially if it is a specialist, there is a wait. So you're going to have a 1-2 month gap, 3 months, depending on where you are and the access to the specialist. With that said, what can parents do at home in the meantime while they wait to see, say, a PT for, say, I'll give the example of my daughter. She had torticollis. So that's a very popular one. Or now she's working on putting weight on her feet. So if I have a gap, what would you recommend to somebody to do while they wait?
Plain and simple, torticollis. What's torticollis? The head's tilted and rotated, right? So what do we need the head to be? Straight. So how do we get there? You can feel it on a child. You can see that it's tight. And most of us are aware of the concept of stretching, right? If something's stuck, what do? We stretch it. And it is oftentimes as simple as that, and prompting a parent to know that they can do it. And I think that, again, with early intervention and stuff like that, there's a lot of things that we already know as parents that we don't need a specialist to tell us. We need to look at the situation and just say, okay, well, what would we normally do? If we were working out and we felt that a joint was tight, what would we do to get that flexibility or range of motion in the joint? Now, grant you, this is a very gross overestimate. If you think that there's something, wrong, some type of spinal injury, neck injury, that's a completely different story. But in the case of something like torticollis, where it's pretty well known in the pediatric world what it is and how to treat it, then that's where I would say, diving in and working on, maybe doing a nighttime massage on the neck with some lavender lotion, and then you're gently stretching as you do it, to be able to not necessarily reverse everything, especially if you're waiting for therapies in those months and stuff like that, but you're still working toward it, stretching the muscles, getting the relaxation, having the child desensitized to the stretching and the massage to the area. Because that's a big thing too, is when you start therapy, sometimes there is a couple weeks where you can really even do progress because there's just a transition of the therapist putting their hands on the child. So even if you're just putting your hands on your child and rubbing those areas, in the case of torticollis on the neck, you're still making progress because you're desensitizing the child and getting them ready to work with the therapist for maybe some massage and stretching. Regarding putting weight on the feet, so there's different ways that you can do that. So it sounds like if there was a situation where you're standing the child up and they don't want to put their feet down, okay, so how else can we start? When the child maybe laying down, putting different surfaces or pushing against their feet. So it's taking those kinds of things. The ultimate goal is to stand, but if I do a different position, or maybe I'm using my hands or I'm using a pillow, those are all things where you're still putting weight through the feet and making progress. So it's those types of things that we as parents already have the tools. I think we sometimes get caught up that it's like we have to wait for the professional, but in the reality is we already know what we need to do.
You're so right. I feel like sometimes we just think like, oh, I don't know what to do. But yeah, a lot of times you can also talk to somebody that may have already gone through that. Like torticollis is so common. Both my kids had it. So second time around, I already knew what to do. But yes, I appreciate you mentioning all that. Finally, do you have any other tips, suggestions, or recommendations? And I do want to let everybody know that all of your information is going to be linked in the show notes. So if anybody wants to contact you, they'll be able to get to you through that with all the information that you've shared, and your website as well. So.
No, thank you so much for having me today. This was great. I think the biggest take home message is just for all the parents out there that are watching is you will always be the best advocate. So it's a role not to be taken lightly. So just empower that and be the advocate for your child and whatever it is that they need developmentally, and really just understanding that in the society that we live, where all of this stuff is kind of, dictated, especially in regards to baby gear and stuff like that, is just really the take home message of understanding there are differences of things that are out there. And if you're not sure, reach out to the manufacturers. We're there to answer questions. We love questions. And so if you're not sure about how you're supposed to be using something with your child, reach out. That's what we're there for.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on and chatting with us, and hopefully making some parents feel a little bit more comfortable with the word and realizing that it's not a scary word.
Nope. Thank you.